And we are live.
Happy almost 4th of July here in the United States. And happy day to the rest of you and the rest of the world. We are here back at the Ancestral Healing Center Cafe Chats. And today we have a very special episode because we're really going to be diving into the immigrant experience. And because the United States is made up of so many different immigrants, we really want to focus today's session on highlighting those stories. And if you are from an immigrant family, please, comment on this below and contact us because we definitely want to hear immigrant stories. They're always super fascinating to us historians, therapists, and genealogists. So if your ancestors entered through Ellis Island at any point in time, they already had a fascinating story getting to the United States, why they did that, what they had to leave, the circumstances in which they came here. But really their American part of their story started after they left the island. And between 1892 and 1954, almost 12 million people passed through Ellis Island. If you're a history buff, Ellis Island is one of the first stops I would recommend you make in the United States because it is just a treasure trove of data and history about families and their experiences coming to the U.S. Of those 12 million, there were about 4 million Italian immigrants who came between the 1890s and 1920s. And of that group of 4 million people, of two families, my great-grandparents and their children were those in that group. So today, we're going to dive into a little bit of my family's story, and I'm going to let Bernadette and Michael kind of comment, give your genealogical perspective, do a little maybe psychoanalysis on me over here about what might have happened to me and my identity because of these specific stories. So before I jump into my story, Michael, Bernadette, anything else that you'd like to add to the story of migration from mainly Europe to the United States through Ellis Island?
I think for me, because I've done a lot of this work, is one of the things to keep in mind when we think of our ancestors coming over. Ruschelle, kind of said what they were coming from, but know that they came. Just think of how they felt when they got there, when they were stepping off that boat, and this was. This was new to them. And just to keep that in mind, to keep the immigrant feeling in mind of like, oh my gosh, we just landed here. So it's for color.
Yeah. So go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I'm just going to say my comment about immigration generally, looking at it through the trauma-informed genealogy lens, is that generally people migrate because they're leaving something.
Yes.
And it may be a lot of people in Britain here love the sun, so people migrate to Spain. So there's no big trauma involved. Nonetheless, there's a comparison between, well, we want to go here and we want to go here. And sometimes the drivers are more powerful and sometimes they're obvious, like the Irish famine, for instance. Sometimes you can see but sometimes you have to look further. And I think Ruschelle's story shows you, I think, how sometimes you need to look further and understand the context of what was going on in your family and in where they lived at the time. So you need to keep a broad eye when you're looking at migration. There's a lot of nuances possible in there.
Yeah. So Michael, that actually, I wasn't going to share this. I wasn't going to go back this far, but because you brought that up, maybe I'll go ahead and share the first story that I know, the origin story that I know about my great grandmother on my paternal side. So that's the line that we're going to be talking about today, is my great grandmother and my grandmother on my father's side. So what I do know is that my great grandfather had already come, I believe he had already come to the US. So and he had there were children already in, I believe they were in Campania. So I know that my great grandmother was coming to be with, my great grandfather in the US. So while my great grandmother was still there with her mother, I believe there were 4 tickets, and my grandmother was not coming. My grandmother was slated to stay in Italy with my grandmother. But before the trip to the US, one of the baby boys was run over in the street by a donkey cart. So he was killed. So my great grandmother lost a child. And my great great grandmother's response to that was, this is a curse. And this is a very bad idea that you're going to the United States. So my grandmother got the ticket, and my great grandmother decided to come on. She didn't listen to the fact that this was a curse, and she went ahead and came to the US. So when they arrived at Ellis Island, their name was with a G, Guerara. And in parentheses on the manifest that we researched in Ellis Island, there was a name, it said Monday, like the day of the week, Monday. So Guerara, and in parentheses, Monday. So before we get into the story about why Monday is so significant, I'm going to pause there. And any thoughts about this? This is the oldest story that I know in my maternal paternal line.
My thoughts are the reaction that the child's death was a curse. There was a tremendous amount of fear about coming across. I mean, you think of just completely not knowing where you're going. I also think it's fascinating that there were 4 tickets. So it was limited to four souls coming across the ocean. And so there are a couple of things there. The one that not everybody could come. They didn't have the money to bring everybody at one time, but also the fact that, the elders in their community, when they were leaving, were like, no, this is not a good idea. So think of what they were, just emotionally, that pull that was going on, who had to stay back, who was leaving, and then a tragedy that happened before. So it's a story that's specific to you, but I guarantee you that repeated itself in different ways through many families.
One of the things, again, that with the immigration, and particularly in the US, when you had so many immigrants coming from different places, but at the same time, and you had these different streams of people coming in from Ireland and Italy and Central Europe and so on, was the clash of cultural values that came out of it. And the thing I'm reminded of, I don't remember where I read this, but they were saying that in, let's say, for instance, some parts of Italy, I believe, that things like, there was a lot of belief in the supernatural, like curses. And then so these people would arrive in America, and they'd go to see the doctor and say, this weird thing has happened. And the doctor would be, a German doctor or something, coming from a completely different cultural thing. And then they say, next thing, it's like, oh, you're insane. And so immigrants could find themselves completely marginalized, not through because there's it's not a deliberate thing. And when you're researching, it comes back to the context of what's happening in this time with these people, and people are always trying to transport their own beliefs and their own ways of being, and then they're coming into collision with different ones that may be more entrenched.
Both of what the two of you are saying actually made me think about something, of course, that I've never thought of before. Well, actually, I did think about this a little. As I got older, children are taught about Ellis Island in the United States. We learn about it in history class. that all these immigrants came here. But what we don't know a lot about, which I don't, maybe the two of you know more about this than I do, is the systems that were actually set up to process these people. And what started and facilitated this migration was industry, and what those industries were doing, why they made the choices that they did, and how they decided to funnel individuals into these industrialized systems. So do either of you have a lot of information about the businesses, the corporations that were behind this, the building of Ellis Island and this mass migration?
No, but that's fascinating. That is definitely something that, do you, Ruschelle, have a lot of information about it?
I do know that there was a lot of mass advertisement in the local communities, that it was the propaganda about this amazing life in this gorgeous place that you were going to have. And it was like a way out. So I do know there was a lot of propaganda there. I also know there was one little bit. I've been to Ellis Island twice, and over the 2 different times that I've been there, they have really transformed Ellis Island into a research hub. I mean, you can go there, it's a museum. It also is full of data and archives. But I was really struck by the use of the infirmary. So there was a medical hospital there. It was a teaching hospital. So one of the main things about the hospital was it has which you can go and see it, there's a lecture hall in it. So they would do procedures and everyone could watch what was happening to the patient there, who, if we talk about consents and how people got there. The other thing was the infirmary was a beautiful facility, is an absolutely beautiful facility. So I know, Bernadette, you want to dive into the infirmary stories a little bit in another episode, and we'll come back to that. But yeah, the through line about who was setting up the systems for these people to come here and where they were going to live and where they were kind of directed to in the United States is a whole research project on its own. But it speaks to Michael's point that there was a context, there was a intentional migration of these people, and they were being intentionally directed places. And then what happened to them was, their own personal stories.
Well, and the one thing I will say, so when they came in, they had to have not necessarily a sponsor, but a sponsor. They had to have a place they were going to. So you couldn't get off, you had to have Uncle Joe's in New Jersey, or somebody's in Chicago, or so there were, whether they were true or not, they had to have a place that they were, a destination they were going once they landed there.
Yeah.
Did you pick up anything when you were there at Ellis Island? Did you kind of pick up anything more intuitive or emotional? Was it like could you feel feel the place rather than just experiencing it mentally? Was it?
So that was before my awakening, my ancestral awakening, Michael. But I can say I was most drawn. I know that I was most drawn to the infirmary. I think there were, that was a difficult and scary place for my family. I know there was a health issue. I don't remember that story specifically, but there was a health issue coming in, but I guess they stayed there and then they passed that, whatever it was, and they were allowed to come on in. So, but that's a good point. We'd love to hear stories from people who visited Ellis Island and maybe had some intense experience when they arrived there, because it's a portal. It's a transitionary spot for a lot of families. A lot of families stayed in New York, and I'm talking about Italian immigrants specifically. There are a lot of Italian neighborhoods in New York. Some other common places where they went was New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. I think those are the top There were also factories in Ohio and Chicago. Chicago was another big place for Italian immigrants. And then West Virginia, where my family came. Clarksburg, West Virginia is the most famous Italian heritage small town in West Virginia. It was Al Capone used to come to Clarksburg and hide out. And it was rumored that he would, if you were not a friend of Al Capone, you might have ended up in the woods in Clarksburg. So that's the local rumor here. So, but back to my grandmother and great grandmother's experience and this idea of Monday. So Monday being a surname. So when I was a little girl, my cousins were Mondays. There was a whole, my uncles, my grandmother's brothers had a big families. And there was a whole community of Mondays in the town that I grew up in. And one day I asked, why is their name Monday? That's an odd name to have. So my parents explained to me that their name was Guerara, and that when they came through Ellis Island, that it was a Monday. So they didn't know how to spell Guerara, and so they just changed their name to Monday. So I grew up, and I remember we had a whole discussion about, isn't this horrendous? This is like terrible. That this is what they would do to people as they came through, and how many other Mondays are in the United States because it was a Monday. So I grew up believing that my grandmother's heritage was erased from her. And this was the dialogue and the narrative that was discussed in our home. And then recently, just within the past year, my sister and I decided to try to get Italian citizenship by descent, which you can still get through your grandparents, through your grandmothers. So, and in doing a little digging, we started to look at the tombstones, and the tombstone actually had, in parentheses, Mondi on the tombstone. And my uncle, he said, isn't that odd that they would put Mondi on the tombstone if that wasn't? So the original name Guerara was there, and then Mondi was there, but it wasn't spelled Monday. It was Mondi. So I asked Bernadette to look at the records during our search for Italian citizenship. And so Bernadette, any thoughts about, I'll turn it over to you, about what you thought about that name.
Well, I thought myself that I had done a lot of research in looking for people's names, and what I often found was the spelling was different, but that the name was often the same. That it wasn't common for them to just assign a name to somebody, and so that sent me on the search that there must be a connection with this name Monday. And one of the things as you just said, we discovered it on one of the the cemetery, we found the name. And then also we started to see it back in the records. I know I'd have to go back and look to remember, but we found evidence that there, I think even on one of the records of them coming in, there was, again, they used the parentheses of Monday or Mondi or Mon, and it was spelled in many different ways. And that's the one thing that happens going through Ellis Island, is that it is somebody writing the name down. And so they're listening to your accent, your way of saying it, and they're doing the best they can to create the name. And for whoever it was that was there, that said Monday, that's where the Monday came. But the family knew that the name was Mondi or Monday, Monde or Mond. There's a few different variations of it.
Yeah. So, Michael, any thoughts about the story that was told to me and how it was told to me and the change in records or anything?
This is so familiar. I've just been working through a similar thing where there's a story that's either told and the context has been lost and the truth has been lost, and instead you get a different story. and that comes down. And to say sometimes it's possible to go back and find out the reasons why, which is great, and sometimes it's all just lost in the mist of time. But these spelling changes and these little things like this can really throw out your whole genealogical search. I had a case just recently where I was searching for a burial record, and I actually had the physical burial card, so I knew this was my great uncle. I knew they were in the cemetery. And I searched the database and it said not there. And so I did a search on their first name, which I thought just as a whim, and there they were, and they'd misspelled the surname on the cemetery database. And if you don't just go, if I hadn't known that he was there, it would have been tempting to go, okay, he's not in this cemetery. So you can lose huge, lines of the branches of your whole family going to be lost on a tiny thing like a spelling mistake. And I had another case recently which was a similar case where my grandmother was in one county in Britain, and she went into labour and they rushed her across the county line to the nearest town. And my mother later went looking for records in the county where they lived, and there weren't any. And so there was a story there that there was nothing, that there was this child that disappeared basically. And when you look across the county line, there suddenly this child appears. And on these tiny little moments, our entire genealogical journey can change, and our entire sense of identity, and particularly when you've got something as fluid as immigration.
Go ahead, Bernadette. Go ahead.
I was going to, add something to that, because what came up for me when you were talking about the way it was passed down to you, can you believe they changed it? They said they came in on a Monday, they gave a Monday as the name. And one of the things when the immigrants came over, especially back then, when things were, there were so many coming over, and the influx of people into the cities wherever they landed was challenging. So their experience of what they thought they were coming to was most likely not what they actually came into. And that the anger of the situation that they found themselves in, they needed a place to put the blame. And so part of that comes up stories of, immigration and the problem with it, and using that, I can't believe they named us Monday, it can be part of that negative feeling of this was not the utopia that we thought it was going to be when we came across.
Well, I know very few things that my grandfather said. Like, I just get these snippets. But one thing that he always joked about and said is exactly that, Bernadette. He said, they said I hopped on a bus and they said I was going to Brooklyn, and I ended up in West Virginia. Like that was his kind of joke about they tricked me. I got here and it was a trick. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's very easy for something like that to actually go from being, something that's actually made up to being taken as gospel, and literally, when actually somebody might just have come up with a funny phrase, and the phrase becomes embedded in family law because it's funny, and then you actually lose the connection of the person who said it, and then next thing it's become, oh yeah, this is what actually happened.
Yeah, and I'm just weaving everything that the two of you are saying together about, and I'm thinking about it in terms of my own identity and what impact it had on my identity. This is a bizarre story, but it ties in. So Look, I didn't grow up speaking Italian. My grandparents did not, they stopped speaking Italian to the best of their ability when they got here. They wanted to assimilate as easy as possible, even though they were really discriminated against, and it didn't work very well. When I was 15, we moved from the very, very small rural town that I grew up in that didn't have a stoplight over to a neighboring town that was much more affluent than ours. And I was 15. And the first 2 weeks of school, I didn't talk to anybody. I had big black curly hair, and I was terrified. So I didn't talk to anyone. And one day, a girl on the bus, so I had this t-shirt that I wore all the time that said something like, I love being Italian, or kiss me, I'm Italian, or something like that. It was like some silly 90s shirt about being Italian. And I was crying on the bus on the way home, and a girl came up to me and she said, what are you crying for? And I said, well, nobody will look at me. Nobody will speak to me. I was shy, so I wasn't talking to anyone, but I was like, nobody will talk to me here. And she said, they think you're a foreign exchange student. They think you can't speak English. I said, what? I said, I just moved across the mountain. So that story is coming up because we were really it was an all-white community. There were not even African Americans. I knew no Jewish people. I thought Jews were unicorns. We were a very isolated group of people, and they were all English descent, except for our family. So we did look quite different there were a few Irish people sprinkled in there too, but it was mainly people that had been there for a very, very long time. And if we're doing this series, the black sheep being the black sheep, right? And even though my church loved me, our community loved us, and I wasn't really discriminated against where I grew up, but there's definitely a sense of othering. And the reason why I'm saying this is because these two stories that I'm talking through are very much an us versus them type of story. You see what they think of you. You see what they, there was a message of, you're not really one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And this comes back to what Bernadette was talking about social containers for shame, places to put the feelings that we haven't got. And you find somebody and you don't bother to find out whether it's true. You don't find out whether the girl with the Italian t-shirt actually speaks English or not, because she's more useful as a container for your woundedness. But I have an assimilation story for you. And so when I was 12, I think it was, we moved to France for a year. I still have no real idea why we moved to France for a year, but it's there, it's in the record. And so I ended up going to this French school. And I remember in French class, there would be this spelling test every week where the teacher would read out a passage in French, and then you had to write it down, and then they would see how many mistakes everybody had, and they would call out the number of mistakes, from sort of the best to the worst, which is a sort of again, there's a shaming implicit going on in this system. So of course, when I arrived, not knowing any French, such and such would have 3 mistakes, and so this person had 5, and I'd have 102. But then over the course of the year that I was there, the spelling test became this thing that the whole class rallied around as my spelling improved. And it was like everybody wanted this number to come down. And every time it came down, it would be like, yes, So it was a kind of a reverse version of that. But it became this, and again, it provided entertainment for them, so it was valuable.
Yeah.
So instead of
That's
the
a
otherness,
great story.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great story, and it's so funny because it was something I was going to make a comment about before you shared that story. So it's a perfect segue. It's a great story. It's also a human story where the children, the however old you were, they were still kids in some, and they were the ones that were like, okay, they were bringing you in as a, as somebody that they were going to help you to get through this kind of, like there was a little bit of rallying around. And one of the things, Ruschelle, that I was thinking about is the story of so many immigrants came, and then because the only jobs available were so, coal miners and, all the things that had certainly probably had a negative connotation to the people that were over the mountain. But when we go back and tell those stories, we needed coal for this country to grow in order for the manufacturing to happen, in order for, there were so many reasons that we needed coal. But that story of my ancestors or my immigrant family, that I should be proud of the fact that they did this, it was never there. It was you, we're not going to be proud of you until you are the manager of the, or you're the whatever. And so it's just an interesting, immigrants come in without this ability to stand proud when they're the ones that got on the boat. They're the ones that said, we're going to do this because something's calling us, and something at home is telling us there's more there. And, so there's just, that's just what's coming up.
So when I moved to New York City after I graduated from college. And at some point I lived in the zip code 10016. And I found this, there was a thing on the, I don't even know what the power company in New York is now, but you can go on the power company and it will literally tell you where your electricity is generated from. Any guesses where my electricity was generated from?
West Virginia?
Yeah, Southern West Virginia was where my electricity was generated from.
Wow.
Yeah, another really cool story that, and Bernadette, I think these are the things that I would love for people who have immigrant backgrounds to, note down for that very reason, because it is such a sense of pride and worthiness when we think about things that way, that literally my neighborhood would not have had power if it wasn't for those people.
Mm-hmm.
The town on the other side of the mountain is a town called Raynell, West Virginia. And at one point it was the largest lumber mill in the world. And it decimated the forests of West Virginia. But at that time, the floors of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel were from Raynell. Mm-hmm. And I don't know where I've read that or where that story came from, but I never forgot it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember, and most people have seen this, the picture of the workmen who were building the Empire State Building?
That are sitting
having lunch out on the, mm-hmm. And, I think to myself, if that was my relative, I would be so proud of them, just incredibly proud of them. But it's not, it's almost like, it's kind of a cool picture, but I don't know that how many people that they really take the pride in that. And immigration stories, it's the reason that we have difficulty with identity is we don't know what to do with the story. And we don't know whether it is it a sense of pride? Should it be? Or do I have to worry about my fessing up here, an Irish I don't know, a grandfather or great uncle or somebody that, was written up in the paper in this bar fight that they had in, like in Brooklyn, and we've got all the details of the bar fight. And it turned out the two families were friends. They were probably just mad at each other. But Irish are always known for being drunks and a bar fight, and so it's like this pushback, like I don't want to claim that family because that story is not great, yet I come from that story, and there's so much pride in what my family is able to do, or was able to do, and what they gave up coming, leaving the homeland. Even as bad as the homeland was, it's still leaving that place that you're from.
Yeah. Bernadette, as you were talking, I was asking myself, why were you looking at where your power came from? Why were you digging around for stories about Raynell and what was there? And I did this meditation a couple of days ago that was just an exploration meditation about worthiness. And it was really kind of a check-in with, like, how worthy do you feel as a person? So when I have therapy clients, I talk about these two different types of worth. There's earned worth. It's our accolades and what we do in the world and what we create. And then there's inherent worth, right? We're just valuable because we exist. So I was checking in with myself about worthiness. And I noticed this little bit of a gap in my inherent worthiness. Like, do I feel inherently valuable just because I'm a person? I work very hard. I try to do my very best in this earned worth part, right? But do I really know that I'm amazing because I exist? And what I think when we look for things like this, I think this just answered my question. Like, I was looking for those things because I wanted something to tell me that I was valuable because I exist. And, sometimes our genealogical search is like looking for our own value. We're like digging and digging and digging and digging. And what we're really looking for is like, somebody tell me that I'm incredible. And our ancestors can definitely help us do that. I mean, they're huge, whether you hear them audibly or whether you read them in the records or whatever, they're huge validation about our own existence.
Yeah, I just went through this. I just wrote an article about identity, and that the identity that we get from our ancestors, and it's not what we think. We think when we get identity from our ancestors, it's like, okay, my ancestors were Irish. They came here. But it was in the as I began to come into my own of who I am, as I moved through, and we've talked about it before, but I moved through this very difficult time when David was sick and passed away. And it was the strength of my ancestors that I suddenly realized was the identity that I had from them. That the strength that they had to go through all of the things that they had been through, life isn't easy. We know life isn't easy just in our own lives and the experiences that we've had since, if we didn't even talk about ancestors and we talked about our own lives, there's difficulties that we've overcome. But we don't recognize that in our identity of strength. We look at the things that, well, why did I end up in this mess? Rather than look at how strong I am. And I actually got that feeling from my ancestors as I was delving deeper into their stories. And I suddenly went, no wonder I was able to come through this. I had that's what came down from them, was the strength.
Yeah, and I've just been through a similar thing, as I talked about on the show last week, discovering that two of my relatives in one family died within a day of each other, and it just literally, it was like the worth of the family just collapsed. And I didn't know this thing had happened, but I didn't understand the extent of the woundedness that had come down around it. And as I pieced the story together, I had this very clear sense of identity restoration just by understanding the story. And there wasn't anything heroic going on. It was just these health issues had hit and just blown the thing apart. But just knowing the story and knowing that the rest of the family survived, and here we are. There was a definite restoration of identity. And so when we're looking at doing trauma-informed genealogy, this is, for me, one of the big outcomes. Is it's not just the names, and it's not just processing the grief and the losses, but it's actually you rebuild your sense of identity as you go through and fill in the missing spaces.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I just want to repeat that back. Doing trauma-informed genealogy is a restoration of our own identity. Yeah. And maybe even an up-leveling of that.
Yeah, it can be finding an identity that you'd never even knew was possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's interesting about that is I agree with that. When this happened, when I really kind of discovered my own identity, it had nothing to do with being Irish, even though I'm almost 100% Irish. It was all about me as a person and my ability to move through the world and create the things I want to create, and to be the kind of person that I want to be. And I think that was my whole life. I had held on to, Bernadette Margaret Teresa O'Brien, the little Irish girl. And I released that. I'm not going to say I won't wear green on St. Patrick's Day, but it's not my identity anymore. It's not, it's different.
Yeah. So if anyone out there is listening and you're looking to up-level your life, which I am a firm believer that doing ancestral healing work in any form will up-level your life, or if you're feeling like a little bit of an outcast or a black sheep, please go to our website and look at the offerings that we have there. Contact us. We'd love to have guests on the show who are talking about their own immigrant stories. And next week, we're going to continue this conversation about identity and our family history. And I believe we're tapping into Bernadette's story a little bit more extensively next week. So we hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please check us out on LinkedIn. Bernadette is on Instagram. And if you'd like to join our upcoming program about healing our black sheep experiences, you can reach out to us and inquire about that as well. So until next time, have a great week and a weekend.